Police called on Black CEO 10 minutes later. The manager is escorted out.
Hello everyone, before we begin today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel is losing traction and subscribing is one of the best ways you can help us. It's quick, free, and allows us to continue bringing you great content. Your support means everything. Let's keep this channel growing collectively. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Sir, step back. You don't belong in this terminal. The words cut through the airport like a blade. It was late morning, the kind of hour when sunlight pours through floor-to-ceiling glass and turns the terminal into a polished stage of motion-rolling suitcases, quiet announcements, the distant growl of jet engines outside. A private jet sat idle beyond the window, sleek and waiting its shadow stretching across the tarmac. At the center of it all stood him, a black man in a plain tan hoodie. No logos. No entourage.
Hands relaxed at his sides.
Calm enough to look almost detached. Two uniformed police officers flanked him now, one slightly behind the other, already reaching for his wrist. The woman behind the counter leaned forward, eyes sharp, finger raised like a verdict. She wore a navy blazer with an airport management badge clipped neatly to her lapel. Blonde hair pulled tight, jaw clenched with certainty. "I said, call the police," she snapped into her radio. This man is refusing to comply. Refusing what she never clarified. Passengers nearby slowed. Some stopped altogether. A few phones rose instinctively, then hesitated, unsure whether to record or look away. This was the moment people always recognized too late, the moment when something ordinary crossed into something ugly. "Sir," the officer said, voice professional but firm turnaround. The metal clicked shut around his wrist. Handcuff? Cold. Public. Final. Not a single word came from him. No protest. No explanation. No anger. Just stillness. If you were watching closely, you might have noticed his eyes steady, observant, taking in everything. The manager's trembling authority. The officer's brief hesitation. The way the crowd leaned in, hungry and uncomfortable at the same time. "This is protocol," the manager said loudly for everyone to hear. "We can't let people like him wander into restricted areas." People like him. The phrase landed heavier than the cuffs. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we're glad you're here. Now back to him. The officer checked his ID. His brow furrowed for half a second, just long enough to notice something didn't align, but the manager stepped in immediately. "There's been an issue," she insisted. He was loitering, acting suspicious.
Suspicious for standing still. Suspicious for saying nothing. Suspicious for not looking like what she expected power to look like.
Outside, a jet engine roared to life. Inside, the terminal felt smaller. Tight, like the air itself was holding its breath. The man in the hoodie finally lifted his cuffed hands slightly, not in resistance, but in quiet compliance. His voice, when it came, was low and controlled. "I'll cooperate," he said. "But you should be very careful about what you do next." The manager scoffed. She had no idea. And neither did anyone else watching as the first irreversible mistake was made. The cuffs stayed on. That was the first thing people noticed when the officer guided him a few steps away from the counter, not roughly, not gently either. Just procedural, like moving luggage that didn't belong where it stood. "Sir, we're gonna step over here," the officer said. He nodded once. No resistance. No tension in his shoulders. He walked at the same measured pace he had moments earlier, as if the metal around his wrists changed nothing at all. That unsettled people. Because most men, when humiliated in public, tried to reclaim space. They argued. They raised their voice. They begged to be seen as human again. He did none of that. The manager followed closely, heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. She kept talking, filling the space with certainty. "We've had incidents before," she said, loud enough for the nearby crowd. "People trying to access private terminals. It's a security risk." Security risk. A few passengers exchanged looks. One woman tightened her grip on her carry-on. A man in a gray suit frowned, then glanced at the jet outside the glass as if trying to understand what any of this had to do with safety. The second officer took position near the man's other side. He didn't speak. He watched. That officer noticed things. The calm breathing. The steady gaze. The absence of panic. This wasn't how suspects usually behaved. "Can you tell us why you were in this area?" the first officer asked, tone neutral, almost bored. The man answered without hesitation. "I was waiting for what." The manager cut in quickly. He turned his head slightly, not toward her, but toward the officer who had asked the question. "For a meeting." With who? She pressed. The officer held up a hand. "Ma'am, let me handle this." Her jaw tightened, but she stepped back half a pace, arms crossed. Authority reclaimed, at least in her own mind. Around them, the terminal slowed. Conversations dropped into whispers. Someone's phone camera lifted, then lowered again. No one wanted to be the first to record. "Not yet, Ed." "This shouldn't take long," the officer said as he examined the ID again. His eyes lingered this time, a fraction longer than before. Something didn't match the story he'd been given. The manager sensed it and leaned forward. "There's no record of him being cleared for this terminal," she said. "We checked." Who is we exactly? The man remained silent now. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he understood something the others didn't. Noise gives people excuses.
Silence takes them away.
A young airport staffer hovered near the edge of the scene tablet, clutched to her chest. She looked from the man to the manager, then to the officers. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something. The manager shot her a look. The staffer froze. The officer cleared his throat. "All right," he said slowly. "We're just going to verify a few things." The manager smiled tight and satisfied. "Of course. Take your time." She thought this was over. The man shifted his weight slightly, the cuffs clinking softly. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the jet. He looked straight ahead, waiting. Because he knew silence wasn't submission. It was leverage. The manager decided to tighten her grip on the story. She stepped closer to the officers, lowering her voice just enough to sound reasonable, measured, practiced, convincing. The kind of tone that had ended conversations long before they ever reached the truth. "He doesn't have clearance," she said, "and he refuses to explain why he's here." That second part wasn't true, but it sounded true. The officer glanced at her, then back at the man. "Sir, do you have any documentation for access to this terminal?" The man didn't answer right away. Not because he was cornered, but because he was choosing what not to give away. "I'm not refusing," he said finally. "I'm complying with your process." The manager exhaled sharply, the way people do when patience turns into irritation. "See, evasive." Evasive. Another word that did a lot of work without meaning much at all. She straightened, confidence returning now that the label had been applied. "Look at him," she added louder this time. "He doesn't have a badge. No escort. No credentials. That's not how authorized passengers behave." Passengers. She'd already decided what he was and what he wasn't. A man nearby shifted uncomfortably. "I've seen people wait here before," he muttered to no one in particular. The manager ignored him. "People think they can just walk anywhere these days," she continued. "Dress however they want. Expect special treatment." The officer's pen paused mid-note. Dress. That was the first real clue. The man wore clean sneakers. The hoodie fit well, not worn, not sloppy. Nothing about him suggested urgency or fear. He didn't look lost. He didn't act entitled. He simply didn't match her picture of legitimacy. The second officer watched closely now. He'd been doing this long enough to recognize patterns. The real ones rarely spoke. The fakes talked too much.
This man did neither. "Mom," he said cautiously, "we still need to verify." "There's nothing to verify," she cut in. "We see this all the time. They wait. They linger. Then they claim a meeting that doesn't exist. They. The word slid out easily. Too easily." The man lifted his head, eyes calm, voice steady. "You're making assumptions." She laughed, once short and dismissive. "I'm making observations." Behind them, the young staffer shifted again. She glanced at her tablet, then back at the man. Her brow furrowed. Something on her screen didn't align with what she was hearing. She took a step forward. The manager noticed immediately. "You can go," she said sharply without turning. "This doesn't concern you." The staffer stopped cold. The officer cleared his throat again, slower this time. "All right," he said. "Let's just run his information through once more." The manager's smile thinned. "Fine." She folded her arms, already certain of the outcome. Because in her world, authority came from appearance, from tone, from who looked like they belonged behind glass walls and who didn't. The man said nothing as the officer turned away with the radio. He didn't watch her gloat. He didn't watch the crowd speculate. He stared straight ahead as if he were the only one in the terminal who understood what was really happening. This wasn't about access. It was about permission. And she had just made the mistake of believing she was the one who granted it. The terminal no longer felt neutral. It had shifted into something else, an invisible circle drawn around the man in cuffs, the officers, and the manager who stood with her arms folded like a judge waiting for confirmation of a verdict she'd already written. People were watching now. Not casually. Intently. A woman near the window leaned toward her husband and whispered, "This feels wrong." He nodded, but didn't respond, eyes fixed on the scene. 2 rows back, a businessman lowered his phone after pretending to check emails for the 3rd time. He wasn't filming, but he was ready. The young airport staffer still stood frozen a few feet away, tablet pressed against her chest. Her eyes flicked down to the screen again, then back up, then down once more. Something was there. Her lips moved silently as she reread the line. The officer returned radio clipped back into place. His face was unreadable, but the rhythm of the moment had changed.
Slower.
He asked fewer questions. He listened more. "We're still waiting on confirmation," he said. The manager waved a hand dismissively. "Take all the time you need."
This happens more often than you'd think.
She smiled, confident again.
"Too confident." The second officer shifted his weight. "Ma'am," he said, choosing his words carefully. "How long did you say he was standing here?" "Too long," she replied instantly. "Long enough to raise concern." The man finally spoke not to her, but to the space around them. "I arrived exactly when I was supposed to." A few heads turned. That wasn't defiance. It was precision. The staffer took another step forward before she could stop herself. Actually, the manager spun. "I told you to step away." The staffer swallowed. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. I think there might be go," the manager said sharply. "Now." The word landed hard. The staffer hesitated, then obeyed. She stepped back, eyes apologetic as they briefly met the man's. He gave her the smallest nod. He'd seen her try. That mattered. A man from the crowd finally spoke up. "Why is he in cuffs if you're still verifying?" The manager turned toward him, irritation flashing. "Sir, this is a security matter." "So was mine last year," the man replied evenly. "And I didn't get handcuffed." Silence rippled. The officer looked at the cuffs, then at the man wearing them. They hadn't been tightened further. They hadn't been removed either. Suspended between 2 decisions. The manager sensed the shift and stepped forward again. We can't take chances, she said loudly. If something happens, we're the ones responsible. Responsible. Another heavy word. The man breathed in slowly. Out again. Calm, controlled, deliberate. The crowd wasn't siding with him yet, but they were no longer siding with her either. And that was the first crack. Because once people stopped accepting authority at face value, the story began to slip from her control. She didn't notice it yet, but everyone else did. The pressure in the terminal pressed inward, but inside him something else stirred. A memory. Not loud. Not dramatic. Quiet. Persistent. Years ago, a different building. Different uniforms. Same look. He had been younger then, dressed sharper, trying harder. Standing in the marble lobby of a downtown office tower, folder tucked under his arm, waiting for an elevator that never seemed to come. A security guard had approached, polite at first. Deliveries use the side entrance. He remembered the pause, the confusion. The way he'd smiled corrected him, explained he was there for a meeting on the 23rd floor. The guard hadn't apologized. He doubled down. That day ended with him waiting outside, phone pressed to his ear, explaining himself to someone who already believed him, but not before every ounce of dignity had been quietly drained out of the moment. That was the day he learned something permanent. It was never about clearance, never about policy, never about safety. It was about who looked like they belonged before they opened their mouth. The clink of metal pulled him back to the present. The cuffs were still there. The terminal was still watching. The manager was still talking. You can see why we can't just take people at their word, she was saying now. That's how mistakes happen. Mistakes. He had heard that word, too. Used to excuse inconvenience. Used to explain humiliation after the fact. He shifted his hands slightly, easing the pressure on his wrists. The officer noticed but said nothing. Another memory surfaced. Later, there. Much later. A boardroom. Frosted glass. A long table. Men who looked at him the same way the manager did now, measuring, subtracting, deciding he was an outlier. One of them had leaned back and said, "You're impressive." Just unexpected. Unexpected success. Unexpected intelligence. Unexpected authority. That meeting had ended differently, because that time, the system worked in his favor. This one would too. The staffer who had been sent away reappeared at the edge of the crowd, pretending to check a monitor. She glanced over again, nervous, torn. Her tablet screen glowed faintly. She knew something now. The officer returned once more, voice lower this time. "We're still confirming access logs," he said. The manager's eyes flicked to him. "There shouldn't be any," she replied. "If there were, we would seen them." "Would?" Not did. The man looked at the floor briefly, then back up. His expression hadn't changed, but inside the calculation was already complete. He knew when to speak. He also knew when silence was the sharper weapon. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to reduce him to an inconvenience. It wasn't even the 10th. But every time before this moment had built something she couldn't see. Every dismissal, every sideways glance, every quiet insult disguised as procedure. They had all taught him patience, and patience he had learned was power when you knew exactly when to let it run out. He lifted his eyes, calm as ever, waiting, because the past had prepared him for this, and the present was about to find out why. The manager lost her patience. You could see it in the way her posture stiffened, in the way her voice sharpened as the officer hesitated 1 second too long. Certainty had curdled into irritation, and irritation, when paired with authority, rarely stayed quiet. "This is taking far too long," she said. "We've already established he doesn't belong here." The officer looked up. "We're still verifying that's not necessary," she cut in. "At this point, he's obstructing operations." Obstructing. The word snapped the remaining restraint in her tone.
She stepped closer, close enough now that the man could smell her perfume, clean, expensive, confident. She didn't lower her voice this time. She wanted witnesses. "You need to remove him," she said, pointing. "Now." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The officer hesitated. Just a beat. Long enough to matter. The manager turned sharply toward him. "If something happens and you didn't act, that's on you." There it was. The line crossed not with a shout, but with pressure. With implication. With the quiet threat of blame. The officer exhaled slowly. "Sir," he said to the man, "we're going to move you to a holding area until this is cleared up." The man didn't argue. But something in his eyes changed, not fear, not anger. Recognition. This was the moment. The cuffs tightened as the officer guided him forward. The metal bit slightly into his wrists, sharper, now deliberate. No longer precaution. A woman in the crowd gasped. "That's unnecessary," she said aloud before she could stop herself. The manager shot her a look. "Mom, stay out of this." The young staffer reappeared again, more frantic this time. She glanced at her tablet, then at the officer. "I really think you should wait," she said softly. There's something the manager spun on her. "I told you to leave." "Are you trying to get fired?" The staffer froze.
Silence fell heavy.
The officer paused mid-step, conflicted. He looked at the man again. Calm. Composed. Still not resisting. "You don't have to do this," the man said quietly. Not pleading. Not warning. Just stating a fact. The manager laughed under her breath. "Oh, we absolutely do." She leaned in, voice low but venomous. "You people think rules don't apply to you? That you can just stand anywhere you want and expect respect? You people." The words hung there, unmistakable. The crowd stiffened. Phones came out now, no hesitation. The officer's jaw tightened. He adjusted his grip anyway and continued forward. That was it. The final insult. The public humiliation. The misuse of power made undeniable. The man took one slow breath in. Then out. "Before you take another step," he said calmly, "I need to make a call." The manager scoffed. "Absolutely not." The officer hesitated again, caught between procedure and instinct. "One call," he said finally. "That's reasonable." The manager opened her mouth to object, and in that instant she lost control of the room. The man lifted his cuffed hands just enough to reach his phone as the officer unlocked it for him. His fingers moved with certainty. No shaking. No urgency. Just precision. The crowd leaned in. Whatever this was about to be, it wasn't going to end the way she thought. The call connected on the second ring. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't turn away from the officers. He spoke calmly, clearly, like a man ordering coffee, not one standing in cuffs in the middle of an airport terminal. "It's me," he said. "We have a situation." That was all. No explanation. No urgency. Just a statement of fact. The officer nearest him watched closely now, attention sharpened. This wasn't how desperate people spoke. Desperate people rushed. They begged. They over-explained. This man sounded prepared. The manager folded her arms tighter, forcing a smile that didn't quite hold. "You have exactly 1 minute," she said. "Then we're done here." He didn't look at her. On the other end of the line, a voice answered, low, efficient, immediate. Whatever was said back made the man's posture shift just slightly. Not relief. Not triumph. Confirmation. "Run it again," he said quietly. "Full access logs. Don't shortcut it." The officer's radio crackled. He glanced down at it, then away.
Something had just come through.
His partner noticed too, the brief tightening around the eyes, the pause before responding. The manager noticed neither.
She was too busy reclaiming the room.
Everyone can relax, she announced to the crowd. This is standard procedure. We deal with situations like this all the time.
Situations like this.
The second officer stepped a half step closer to his partner and lowered his voice. I'm getting a hit, he murmured. What the first officer asked. Not criminal. Administrative. That word carried weight. The young staffer, still hovering near the edge, froze when she heard it. Her eyes darted to her tablet again. She scrolled quickly now, heart racing. There it was, clear as day. She swallowed and took a step forward before fear could stop her. Officer, she said softly. I think the manager snapped her head around. I told you to stay out of this. But the officer raised a hand. Let her speak. The room went still. The staffer's voice trembled, but she didn't back down. There's an executive clearance logged under his name, she said. It's not local. It's above my level. The manager laughed, sharp and incredulous. That's impossible. The officer held out his hand. May I see that the staffer passed him the tablet? He read, then read again. The first officer leaned in. His expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. The kind of change that meant something irreversible had begun. Ma'am, he said slowly to the manager who authorized this call. She frowned. I did. On what grounds? He didn't belong here. The officer looked at the man in cuffs, then back at the screen, then at his partner. Belong. The man ended the call and slid the phone back into his pocket. He still hadn't smiled, still hadn't explained himself. He didn't need to. The crack was no longer invisible. It was spreading. The atmosphere shifted without warning. Not loudly, not dramatically. It was the kind of change you felt before you understood it, like air pressure dropping before a storm. The first officer straightened tablet still in his hand. He didn't look at the manager this time. He looked at his partner. Undo the restraints, he said quietly. The manager blinked. Excuse me, we need to reassess the officer, replied, eyes never leaving the screen. This situation is no longer what we were told.
The metal clicked.
One cuff opened, then the other. The sound was small, but it landed hard. The man rolled his wrists, once slowly, deliberately. No rush, no glare, no satisfaction.
Just relief, without expression.
The manager took a step forward. You can't just let him go, she said, voice sharp, now losing its polish. This is a restricted area. That hasn't changed. The officer finally looked at her fully. Actually, he said, it has. The second officer spoke into his radio voice, low and controlled. Requesting internal escalation. Terminal oversight. Immediate. The word oversight drained the color from the manager's face. What does that mean? She demanded. It means the officer replied evenly. This is no longer a field decision. The young staffer exhaled for the first time in minutes. Around them, the crowd leaned in closer. Phones were out now, openly, unapologetically. The story had flipped, and everyone felt it. The man adjusted his hoodie, smoothing the sleeve where the cuffs had been. His movements were calm, unhurried, as if the last 10 minutes hadn't happened at all. The manager laughed again, brittle this time. This is ridiculous, she said. You're overreacting to a clerical error. The man finally turned toward her. Not confrontational, not angry, just present. You didn't call this in as a clerical error, he said quietly. You called it in as a threat. The words landed. The officer's radio crackled again, this time with urgency. A voice on the other end asked for names, badge numbers, incident codes. The officer answered without hesitation. The manager's confidence faltered visibly now. I was doing my job, she insisted. I followed procedure. The officer shook his head slightly. Procedure doesn't include assumptions. Silence spread. The man reached into his pocket again, not for his phone this time, but for a slim card. He didn't hand it to her. He handed it to the officer. The officer glanced at it, then looked up. "Yes, sir," he said instinctively. The manager heard it. Her breath caught. "Sir, sir." The man met her eyes at last. Still calm. Still measured. "This is the part," he said softly, "where you stop talking." And for the first time since this began, she had no choice but to listen. The terminal had gone quiet. Not the kind of quiet that came from order, but the kind that followed a realization. Phones hovered midair. Conversations stopped halfway through sentences. Even the rolling suitcases seemed to pass more carefully now, as if the space itself had decided to pay attention. The officer handed the card back with both hands. "Yes, sir," he repeated, this time with certainty. The manager stared at the exchange, confusion flickering across her face before hardening into denial. "I don't understand what's happening," she said. "Who exactly do you think you are?" The man didn't answer right away. He took a moment instead, adjusted the cuff of his sleeve, straightened his posture, and looked around the terminal. At the people watching. At the staff who had gone silent. At the glass walls separating them from the aircraft beyond. Then he spoke. "You call the police," he said calmly, "on the person who signs the access contracts for this terminal." The words landed without force. "They didn't need it." The officer stiffened. His partner's eyes widened just slightly. The young staffer's hand flew to her mouth. The manager let out a short laugh. "That's not possible." "It is," he replied. She shook her head, scrambling now. "You're saying you own this place. I'm saying," he corrected gently, "that I oversee the entity that does." The radio crackled again, louder this time. A supervisor's voice cut through, clipped and urgent, asking for confirmation. The officer responded immediately, listing names, departments, escalation codes. Each one tightened the knot around the manager's composure. Her voice dropped. "This is a misunderstanding." The man met her gaze. "No," he said. "It's a pattern." That word did what the others hadn't. Pattern. The officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said, turning to her fully, "now we're going to need you to step back." "What?" she snapped. "You can't be serious." "You initiated a law enforcement response without verified cause," he continued. "That's being reviewed." Her face drained of color. The crowd murmured openly now. No whispers. No hesitation. Wait, so she was wrong. She just assumed they cuffed him for nothing. The man didn't react to any of it. He looked at the officer again. "I'd like this incident logged," he said evenly. "In full." The officer nodded. "Already in progress." The manager took a step backward without realizing it. "I was protecting this facility," she insisted weakly. The man's voice never rose. "You weren't protecting anything," he said. "You were deciding who mattered." The supervisor arrived moments later, breathless, eyes sharp. He took in the scene, the cuffs gone. The crowd gathered, the manager standing alone. He approached the man first.
"Sir," he said respectfully, "we apologize for the disruption."
The apology echoed. The manager's authority collapsed in real time.
She opened her mouth to speak and realized no one was listening anymore.
The supervisor didn't raise his voice. "He didn't have to." "Ma'am," he said, turning toward the manager, "I need you to step away from the counter." Her mouth opened, then closed again. "I'm the duty manager," she replied automatically, clinging to the title like it could still shield her. The supervisor's tone stayed even. "Not for this incident." That sentence did more damage than any accusation. Security personnel moved not toward the man, but toward her.
Subtle at first.
A shift in formation. A quiet repositioning that said everything without saying it out loud. The crowd noticed. Phones angled higher. The manager glanced around, suddenly aware of how exposed she was. "This is getting blown out of proportion," she said, her voice thinner now. "I followed procedure." The man stood a few feet away, hands free, posture relaxed.
He didn't interrupt. He didn't argue. He let the system speak for him. The supervisor nodded to one of the officers. Deactivate her access for now.
For now, she repeated sharply. The officer tapped into his device. A soft beep sounded from the manager's badge. Red. She looked down at it, confused, then alarmed. She tried the counter terminal behind her. The screen flashed once, then locked. No, she said quietly. That's not there. Must be a mistake. The supervisor met her eyes. You initiated a police response based on assumption, he said. That's being escalated. Escalated. The word hung heavy in the air. A murmur rolled through the terminal, satisfaction, disbelief, relief. The same crowd that had watched the man be cuffed now watched the balance shift in real time. The man finally spoke again, not to her, but to the supervisor. I don't need an apology, he said calmly. I need accountability. The supervisor nodded once. Understood. He turned back to the manager. You're going to accompany us to the administrative office. Her head snapped up. Am I being detained? No, the supervisor replied. You're being removed from duty. Removed. Two security officers stepped to either side of her, not touching, not forceful. Just present. Inescapable. She looked at the man, then searching for something, anger, satisfaction, mercy. She found none of it. Only composure. As they guided her away from the counter, the path she'd once controlled opened unwillingly before her. People stepped aside, not in fear, but in recognition. The man remained where he was, adjusting his sleeve once more, eyes steady. The reversal was complete. And for the first time since this began, the terminal felt like it could breathe again. The walk was slow. Not because anyone delayed it, but because every step carried weight. The manager moved between two security officers, now her badge dark against her blazer useless. They didn't touch her. They didn't need to. Their presence alone rewrote the rules of the space she had dominated minutes earlier. People watched openly. No whispers this time. No pretending not to stare. A man near the windows lowered his phone slightly and said almost to himself, "That's karma." The manager's heels clicked against the floor, the sound sharp and exposed without the authority that once softened it. She tried to speak once, twice, but the supervisor ahead of her didn't slow. This way, he said without turning. The path parted. The same crowd she had leaned on for legitimacy now stepped aside without sympathy. Not cruel, not mocking, just aware. At the counter, the man remained still. He didn't follow. He didn't watch her leave with satisfaction or anger. He stood exactly where he had stood when the cuffs were removed, hands relaxed, posture neutral. Witness, not victor. The young staffer caught his eye as the manager passed out of sight. Her expression was a mix of relief and disbelief.
She mouthed, I'm sorry.
He nodded once. That was enough. The supervisor returned moments later, adjusting his jacket, face composed but changed. Sir, he said, we've documented the incident in full. Compliance and internal review are engaged. The man nodded. Good day. No follow-up. No lecture. The supervisor hesitated, then added, your access has been restored. And we appreciate your restraint. Restraint. The word settled gently, unlike the others. Around them, the terminal resumed its rhythm slowly. Conversations restarted in fragments. Suitcases rolled again. Announcements echoed overhead, pretending nothing extraordinary had just happened. But everyone knew better. A woman passed by and glanced at him, eyes warm with something close to gratitude. A man gave a small nod of respect. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The power shift had already said everything. The man adjusted his hoodie, smoothed the sleeve where metal had pressed into skin. No marks remained, but the moment would. He turned toward the glass wall and looked out at the aircraft waiting beyond it. The jet engines were quiet now, patient. Ready. Behind him, The counter stood empty. The space where the manager had ruled now felt exposed, smaller, stripped of pretense. The supervisor cleared his throat. "If there's anything you need," the man shook his head gently. "There isn't." He took one last look around the terminal, not to claim it, not to conquer it, but to acknowledge what had been revealed. Then he stepped forward, unhurried, and continued on his way. Not escorted, not followed. Just walking exactly where he had always belonged. The terminal moved on. That was the quiet truth of it. Flights boarded, screens refreshed. Announcements echoed overhead in the same calm, automated tone they always had. To anyone arriving late, it would have looked like nothing more than another ordinary day at the airport. But for those who had witnessed it, the space felt altered, like a room after a storm had passed through without breaking a single window. The man walked toward the gate at an unhurried pace, footsteps steady, shoulders relaxed. No escort. No special clearance displayed. No one rushing to apologize again. He didn't need any of that. Behind him, the counter remained empty. A supervisor stood there now, speaking quietly into a headset, issuing instructions that would ripple outward long after the crowd dispersed. Reports would be filed. Footage reviewed. Language dissected. Decisions reconsidered. Consequences would come, not dramatically, not publicly, but permanently. The young staffer watched from a distance as he passed. This time, she didn't look afraid.
She looked taller somehow.
Straighter, as if seeing the outcome had changed what she believed was possible inside systems that so often felt immovable. He met her eyes briefly and gave a small nod. Not gratitude. Recognition. Near the gate, a man seated with a coffee leaned back and said softly to his companion. He never raised his voice. His companion nodded. He didn't have to. That was the part that lingered. No shouting. No speeches. No demands for respect. Just composure held long enough for the truth to surface on its own. The man stopped near the window, once more watching the aircraft beyond the glass. Sunlight reflected off the fuselage, bright and clean. Movement resumed around him, but he stood still for a moment, letting the silence inside settle. He thought not bitterly, not triumphantly about how often silence had been mistaken for weakness. How many times people believed that dignity required permission. How often authority confused itself with righteousness. Today hadn't changed the world, but it had changed a room. And rooms were where systems revealed themselves. The boarding announcement sounded. He picked up his bag and moved forward seamlessly, rejoining the flow of travelers. No one stopped him. No one questioned him. No one needed to. As he reached the gate, he paused just long enough to speak quietly, not for the crowd, not for the cameras, but for the moment itself.
I didn't raise my voice, he said.
I raised the standard. Then he stepped onto the jet bridge, disappearing from view as the terminal returned to its rhythm, carrying with it a story that would be told again and again, not because it was loud, but because it was undeniable.